As you know, I'm Kathryn HUETHER. I just presented, and I'm really excited to also be moderating for this panel on in popular music. Today, we will just have one paper, Adam BEHR, who is a reader in music, politics, and society, and head of music at Newcastle University in the UK. And his paper today will be Towards a Typology of Popular Musical Antisemitism. So let's please welcome Adam.
Right, thank you very much. Thanks also to the Brooks Center, Society for Jewish Music for hosting, and a big thanks to all the previous speakers for so much food for thought, particularly the panel immediately preceding, which I will be hurriedly incorporating into my thinking. Couple of opening health warnings, I guess. One is that, like some of the previous presentations, this contains images of overt anti-Semitism, as well as some more debatable instances that people might find offensive. Second is a more standard conference caveat that this is very much work in progress. These are fairly opening thoughts. I'm just sort of wading into these waters for the first time, rather than like some of our previous presenters presenting the findings of extant research. So what I'm looking at and for really are ways forward, and so I'll look forward to comments and am open to ideas. Another caveat, I am an academic after all, we do those. So a caveat, or rather an acknowledgement, I guess, of some underpinning issues. Namely, my focus here is on popular music, my stated focus, but I'm very much aware that this is a broad and tricky label with multiple angles of approach, both aesthetic and sociological. We could add industrial to that as well. Scholars in popular music studies, itself an interdisciplinary concern, have noted this. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but just to set some of the underpinning issues around definitional work here, even for popular music, that's before we even get to defining anti-Semitism. Richard Middleton, for instance, noted that popular music as a term can be used sort of normatively or judgmentally, perhaps even in some contexts. Popular music perhaps as inferior in some way, but then to what? It's commercial or manufactured or simple, but that doesn't really work. It's not straightforward to say that Frank Zappa, for instance, is simple music. Another way of trying to set some parameters around it might be to look negatively. What is it not? What is not popular music? It's distinct from art music, let's say, or folk music, but that really just defers the problem. Or sociological, the music of a particular group, who listens to it? Or technological economic definitions, mass music, modern, bear in mind, Middleton was writing in the 90s here, modern capitalist production and consumption. But what kind of music is truly outside of capitalist or industrial processes? Deutsche Grammophon is a record label. So I don't propose to triage all of these today, save to note that in industrial terms, and going purely by the numbers, the sales, the clicks, quite a lot of, scare quotes, popular music isn't actually all that popular. I'll come back to that later on. Most releases don't make back their investment, and that has long historically been the case. So aesthetically, it's difficult to pin down. As Simon Frith, another of the doyens of popular music studies, noted, pop, itself a contested term, is a slippery concept, perhaps because it's so familiar, so easily used. Pop can be differentiated from classical or art music on the one side, from folk on the other, but may include every sort of style. When Nessun Dorma, an operatic aria, was used as the theme to the World Cup, Football World Cup, not soccer. I know where I am. It got to number 2 in the UK charts, so clearly commercial and popular, but also an operatic aria. So this is just to note that there are problems in terms of setting aesthetic dividing lines. There is, of course, also a sociological dimension. Popular music is replete with genres and seemingly infinite subgenres. Think of all the variations of metal or punk or jazz, for that matter. Sludge metal, doom metal, black metal, thrash metal, and infinite variegations, half of which I can't quite tell the difference between because I am sociologically an outsider to that genre. So as Keith Nagus has put it, moving across or within musical genres is more than a musical act. It is a social act. More than a struggle for new musical relationships and sounds, it can involve a desire for new social relationships and harmonies. Crossing genre worlds and bringing new genre cultures into being is not only an act of musical creation, it is also an act of social creation, of making connections, of creating solidarities. And Nagus was writing just at the cusp there of the 21st century. But I think some of what we've seen in the previous panel is germane to that. So all of which is to say that I am taking quite an open approach to what popular music is. Broadly, after the introduction of recording with roughly commercial intent, or at least making a type of music that aligns with or derives from those musical milieu. So, popular music is hugely, almost infinitely variable and changeable. That's one of its pleasures. So too, less pleasurably, is anti-Semitism. Now, in terms of areas of popular music, perhaps those most easily or most stridently associated with explicit, overt, old school, right-wing anti-Semitism are those arguably at a slight remove from the commercial mainstream. This is not to say at all that they aren't significant and that they aren't risk-bearing or that they should be ignored. Rather, for the specific purposes of this paper, it's just to make the point that they are comparatively easy to identify and categorize. Again, I defer to some of what I saw in the last panel in terms of there are mixtures there, but there are certain genre types of extreme metal, certain subgenres of punk that are traditionally more easily located as vectors of anti-Semitism. When you have a skin punk band like Screwdriver singing, "Once a nation and now we're run by Jews, we want our country back now," that's less of a challenge in terms of a typology. As I'll get to, it falls into the class of central to the artistic project and highly unambiguous. We could say the same about fascistic and anti-Semitic elements of some black metal, like Burzum or Vard Vikernes, or perhaps some of the more extreme fringes of rap music. These are areas where the presence of hate speech and discriminatory ideology is often more visible and has sometimes become part of the subcultural identity. But the aesthetics outside of the lyrics are slippery too. Associating anti-Semitism with specific musical genres based on their aesthetics or sonic qualities proves much more difficult. Genre boundaries are fluid. Musical styles are filled with contradictions and exceptions. A genre may carry a reputation, but there will be many acts within it, as with punk, as with metal, espousing widely different ideological perspectives. Some explicitly anti-racist, others ambiguous or ambivalent, and others still pursuing bigoted paths. No genres own anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic content. Meanings shift with context, audience, and evolving musical language. Social contexts, then, are absolutely key. So it's difficult to unpack this. Again, sometimes it is obvious from the context, even of instrumental music. We hear fash wave, and a bit like that dark techno track. You listen to fash wave on its own. It's the sort of sonic wallpaper, albeit quite dark sonic wallpaper, but it's the explicit track names that give it away: Reich Machine, Iron Wolf, Iron Mensch, and so forth. But it's difficult to locate entirely in the musical aesthetics. Things become more complicated and ambiguous and troublesome closer to the mainstream, with larger and often less immediately engaged audiences. Firstly, there's the matter of authorial voice. We can ask, is this an expression of anti-Semitism or a depiction of it? Is the author or performer singing a character? And how explicitly? Is irony being deployed, for instance? Two contrasting examples here. How contrasting? Perhaps we can debate. Randy Newman's Rednecks from 1974. Last night I saw Lester Maddox, segregationist governor of Georgia at that time, with some smart-ass New York Jew. The Jew laughed at Lester Maddox, the audience laughed at Lester Maddox too. The narrator of this song then tells how he went to a park and he wrote this song. This was derived from a stormy appearance by Maddox on the Dick Cavett show. Dick Cavett, as it happens, is not, in fact, Jewish. But Newman takes this and runs with it, singing in the voice of a Southern bigot, a supporter of Maddox. Now, we can reasonably assume a few levels of irony and distance here, not least that is part of Newman's authorial strategy, and his Disney music aside, what his brand is based largely on that. In Political Science, for instance, he sang about dropping the big one, a nuclear bomb, to see what happens. I think we can probably posit that he wasn't advocating global annihilation. Short People, another piece about racism, had Newman voicing a protagonist who don't want no short people round here. People did, in fact, some people took him seriously. There were calls to ban the record. His own take on the creation in Redneck. Now, I hate everything that he stands for, but they didn't give him a chance. He's talking about the TV crew. They didn't give him a chance to be an idiot. And here he is, governor of a state. These people elected in Georgia, however many million people voted for him. And I thought, if I were Georgian and I'd voted for him, I would be angry. Worth noting that the song, though, is problematic I don't necessarily mean problematic there in a judgmental way. The song creates problems in a number of ways. Newman himself rarely plays it now. His character, his bigoted character, is also rather liberal with the use of the N-word. But, nevertheless, clearly a depiction in some sort. Michael Jackson's use of old-school tropes, the cheating Jew, on the single from the album His Story, promote an immediate backlash. Jew me, sue me, everybody do me, kick me, kike me, don't you black or white me. Jackson initially claimed to be misinterpreted. The idea that these lyrics could be deemed objectionable is extremely hurtful to me and misleading. The song, in fact, is about the pain of prejudice, and hate is a way to draw attention. The pain of prejudice and hate, and is a way to draw attention to social and political problems. I am the voice of the accused and the attacked. I am the voice of everyone. I am the skinhead. I am the Jew. I am the black man. I am the white man. Also, perhaps less convincingly, it's not anti-Semitic because I'm not a racist person. I could never be a racist. I love all races. This latter formulation is important because it speaks to questions of extra-musical factors, as well as authorial voice. It's also a fairly common trope amongst people caught short in their actions, a somewhat circular definition. It can't be racist because I'm not a racist. An appeal to the unknowable, or at least the unprovable, interior. Nevertheless, Jackson backed down. Subsequent versions saw the slurs covered up with noise, and remixes had "Sue Me" repeated twice. As it happens, Jackson was later, in 2005, recorded saying of Jews that they are, quote, leeches, and conspired to leave him, quote, penniless. "They suck," said Jackson. "I'm so tired of it. They start out the most popular person in the world, make a lot of money. It's a conspiracy. Jews do it on purpose." So his purported artistic persona, nevertheless, was one of tolerance. Of "they don't care," he said, "I just want you all to know how strongly I am committed to tolerance, peace and love, and I apologize to anybody who might have been hurt." So, extra-musical content, then, is important in terms of how we read the music itself. UK grime artist Wiley was dubbed the godfather of grime, awarded an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, in the Royal Honours List. His musical output didn't contain, certainly not obviously, anti-Semitic content prior to a prolonged anti-Semitic meltdown in 2020. This saw him dropped by his management company and stripped of his MBE. His outburst likely derived from a dispute with his manager, who was Jewish. There are two sets of people, Wiley, two sets of people who nobody has really wanted to challenge, hashtag Jewish and hashtag KKK. But being in business for 20 years, you start to understand why. Rednecks are the KKK and Jewish people are the law. Work that out. There was a lot more of this. Another prominent example, and I won't dwell too much on this because it's been covered amply just beforehand, is Kanye West. Prior to the release of his, Heil Hitler single, West has obviously doubled down. That release is, in a sense, a doubling down of his 2022 23 outburst, calling DEFCON 3 sick. I think he meant DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. Now, there are well-rehearsed complications around this case in terms of his well-known mental health issues and the extent to which he is playing with far-right tropes for commercial or other reasons, ironizing them or incorporating them into a weird version of his own branding or other types of nationalism. I'll park that now just to note that these are prolonged outbursts were at least, whatever else they were, unambiguously anti-Semitic, and also so in that they were explicitly targeted at Jews qua Jews. Which takes us into the murkier waters, if you'll pardon the pun, of the Z word, Zionism, or anti-Zionism. Now, this is fraught territory, and I don't propose to set out a definitive line on anti-Zionism in all its forms. But it is inescapable that it is a significant fault line in modern debates around anti-Semitism, notably within practitioners of popular culture, which is replete with objections to, variously, and not only, the actions of the Israeli government and to Israel itself to court. And this is where typographical work becomes both more difficult and perhaps more important, especially since this constitutes a growth area, as it were. Former Pink Floyd songwriter, singer, and bassist Roger Waters is a case in point here. Operating along several axes of traditional anti-Semitism, Jews qua Jews, and more debatable, new anti-Semitism, ostensibly anti-Zionism, but to a level that arguably crosses a line. There are also some ironies and ambiguities at play in terms of what Waters was critiqued for and in his response. His 2023 tour was mired in controversy, primarily due to elements of staging drawn from the 1980 Pink Floyd album The Wall, in which a protagonist, the character Pink, imagines himself a fascist dictator as part of his alienation-driven breakdown. At the center of the initial controversy was this on-stage imagery, particularly an SS-style leather trench coat emblazoned with quasi-fascist crossed hammer symbols, which Waters wore while brandishing a prop machine gun. This was in fact investigated in Germany under laws forbidding displays of Nazi symbols as part of restrictions on hate speech, but with exceptions for artistic and educational purposes. Waters' response was that the costume depicts a fictional character who imagines himself a totalitarian icon, and second, that this is nothing new. In fact, the album goes back to the 80s and the character. Said Waters, "It's called theatre, darling. It's satire." There is, in fact, truth in this. Although he had, in fact, been in hot water previously for another prop. Another staple of his live act was an inflatable flying pig based on the 1977 album Animals. This got him into difficulties when he adorned it with a Star of David. You can just about see this, the Star of David alongside the symbols of capitalism. He added other religious symbols following complaints. Now, with regard to the 2023 tour and the imagery, the irony here is that Waters actually had a point in terms of this being theatrical and being staged. He was criticised across party lines in the UK. Keir Starmer of Labour, Michael Gove of the Conservatives, not generally known for their shared opinions, both called him out for this. He laid the blame for his touring travails and the controversy, amongst much else, at the feet of the, quote, Israeli lobby. And his difficulty there lies in journeying to the margins of political discourse, where elements of the conspiratorially minded left and right share common ground in their opposition to the mainstream, despite their mutual enmity. Waters was also, around this time, quoted, for instance, criticizing the Syrian volunteer operation, the White Helmets, criticizing Zelensky of Ukraine, noting of Russian involvement in Syria, that they were there at the invitation of the Syrian government, itself a legitimate government in the absence of any evidence that says otherwise. Challenged on human rights abuses in China after saying that Taiwan belonged to China, Waters' response was bollocks. That is absolute nonsense. So he's kind of drifted away from the center of the discourse on politics. He's shown, to put it mildly, a proclivity for conspiratorial thinking. He offered the familiar claim that he was not being anti-Semitic, but criticizing Israel. Fair enough, I guess. Criticism of Israel, of course, is often warranted, and of course is not necessarily anti-Semitic. However, this doesn't mean that it is axiomatically not anti-Semitic, as Waters appeared to contend. His own definition of, quote, valid criticism of Israel is apparently capacious enough to include that the country, quote, gave the country, i.e. the UK, to the Tories, and also installed Keir Starmer as the leader of the Labour Party, who is completely controlled by the Israeli lobby. Another Labour MP, Christian Wakeford, accused Waters of using the performances to stoke division. Waters' response was to call him a, quote, cripple, adding that he was, quote, making shit up because you were told to by your masters in the Foreign Office in Tel Aviv. So this is the kind of criticism that is shading into echoes of the protocols of the elders of Zion. So he's not unique in this, and I'm going to move on from now. I give this example because given these extra musical contexts, I think we're moving towards the point where application of extra musical analytical tools can be useful. So I've laid this one out here that's been used. This is the Generalized Anti-Semitism Scale, a social science survey tool developed by Daniel Allington at King's College with David Hirsch and Louise Katz from Goldsmiths, with two subscales for what they call Judeophobic anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. It's important to note that that's anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, not all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Rather, it's acknowledging some of it is. This was based on previous scales used by the ADL here and the Campaign for Anti-Semitism. What it attempts to do is account for overlaps between classic anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Zionist conspiratorial thinking, whilst acknowledging that legitimate critique of Israel is possible. You can see the base codings here for the Judeophobic question set and the anti-Zionism question set. What I am not proposing, certainly not at this stage, is adoption of this tout court. It is rather an illustration of the kinds of social science method that we can perhaps bring to a typology of anti-Semitism in popular music. Again, I'm not proposing that we can apply a social survey tool directly to music analysis. An extra musical incidence directly or wholesale is presented here as an indication of the kinds of questions we can ask about overlap. I should say that as well, they've tested this tool quite extensively and on large samples and found divergence, but also quite a large overlap between conspiratorial anti-Zionist thinking and the answers to the Judeophobic anti-Semitism questions. Which takes me to my very early stages thinking around typologies for popular musical anti-Semitism, to which I'm going to have to include that idea of sonic contagion within the intra-musical. I'm not going to, you can see this broadly in and of itself. I don't propose to go through every single iteration here, but hopefully we can see how some of the examples presented here might fit within this. So your screwdriver, central to the artistic project or persona, ambiguity, highly specific. Michael Jackson, fairly specific, but arguably dissonant with the image or persona or the artistic project. Randy Newman, very likely ironic, stylized, and so forth. So really what I'm arguing for is a move towards a more systematic, quantifiable way of approaching incidents within music or across musical celebrity personae to account for the difficulties in applying aesthetic criteria. For the more obvious, old school, right-wing coded anti-Semitism, and the more recently prominent, but more debatable, left-wing variety. And for both, it acknowledges that anti-Semitism is not all or nothing. We can borrow a formulation from sociologist Richard Peterson's discussion of music genres and the tropes and movement across them. He was referring to country music, and he talks about a hardcore and a soft shell. The hardcore, very obviously, of the genre, the soft shell elements of it, but more fluid and operating at the boundaries. Likewise with anti-Semitism. You know, there's a hardcore of intractable people, all the way out to people who we wouldn't really call anti-Semitic at all, but are nevertheless in the orbit. So we need this typology to be able to identify that nuance, those differences. I'll leave this now and just note, as won't have escaped anyone here, that anti-Semitism is the subject of diverse modalities of expression. A typology can be useful for demonstrating its expression amongst public figures and artists as manifested in various forms, from ambiguous lyrical allusions to explicit ideological declarations. Some, perhaps, it's just laziness or sins of poor information rather than overt commission. A balanced scale, pardon me. That diversity necessitates a contextualized approach. It acknowledges that celebrity can be an anti-Semitic amplifier. And a final example, we can see this in the recent controversy surrounding the Northern Irish Rap Act, NECAP. Band member Mo Chara facing charges for supporting terror, wrapped in a Hezbollah flag at gigs. The band also stated on stage in November 2023, "The only good Tory is a dead Tory. Kill your local MP." They apologized for that, but have been unrepentant for stage comments, "Up Hamas, up Hezbollah." They say these were taken out of context, but not what that context was. Echoes, perhaps, of Jackson's boilerplate denial, but there are other contexts there as well. They are operating explicitly from a Northern Irish perspective against the British government. NECAP could argue, with some justification, that this is a staged provocation and say they don't support Hamas, which is why we need to move beyond I say, you say in these kind of debates. It would be useful to have a tool that draws the line between the hardcore and the soft shell, those loosely concerned with human rights abuses and those marching towards conspiracy tropes, while acknowledging the possibility of artistic and creative nuance. This surely does not take us all the way there, but is hopefully a start. Thank you. Do I stand here or do I?
Great, thank you so much. We have lots of time for some questions now.
I don't have half an hour's worth. I don't have an extra 2 papers worth of material, I'm afraid.
Does anyone have?
Thank you so much for this wonderful paper. As somebody who finds quantitative approaches to humanities and popular culture extremely compelling, to the point that I turned an entire dissertation chapter a couple years ago into basically a spreadsheet and made it a point of analysis for myself because I couldn't find any other way of getting my head around a huge amount of data. Yeah. You know, what do we do with this? Like, it's a wonderful concept, this idea that we can create a typology that can then lead us to having definitive answers when we deal with these very messy, provocative, difficult human questions. And it's okay if you don't have a definitive answer yet, but I'm just kind of curious as to where you think this might lead us. Okay,
well, I definitely don't have one yet. And I'm not certain that we will get a definitive answer. But, this is why the paper is called Towards a Typology. We're not, I don't think particularly things change. I mean, as we've seen with TikTok, with, as scholars, we're just about getting to grips with Instagram, and then it's TikTok, and we'll just about get to grips with that, and there'll be this 3D thing implanted in our brains that we haven't even thought of. But we need to be moving in that direction. So I think it's important to move in that direction. So I don't think we're ever going to, the political context changes very quickly, the social context changes very quickly, the musical context changes very quickly. But I think some attempt to quantify at least moves us away from the realm of assertion. Right. You know, and I don't want to take emotion out of it. I'm not a robot, but you know, there are strong feelings at work all over this subject. You know, and to sort of hark back, I think the last paper, education. What do we do about this? I think just saying you're anti-Semitic is not helpful. Right. Particularly because people burrow in, and not just any kind of accusation of hate speech. Have you ever heard anyone say, "Oh yeah, maybe I was a bit racist there"? Of course they don't, because it's such a charged word. But if we've got some kind of more quantifiable thing, then we can say, for instance, can you not see that this exists on this scale? And consider that. It just gives us footholds in what is otherwise too slippery. And then
it does. And my very quick follow-up question is just then, have you thought at all about weighting, of how you would weight such a typology? Of, you know, do the things that people say contextually mean more in the scheme of things than how their music, let's say, is titled or then participates in the sonic equation of anti-Semitism, etc.?
I have thought about that. I don't have an answer. I would just note that a bit like the GEAS scale, those questions are like it. Yeah, so it's, you know, it's do you think Jews control the media, or do you think Israel gets away with everything? It's not yes, no, it's 1-5. Strongly agree, disagree. So it is along those models. The way that I've done this, I couldn't find a way to do this on a slide that's not a spreadsheet, but really these would be for each one of those. You know, the ambiguity, specificity, highly specific, highly ambiguous, you know, highly ironic, not ironic at all. The actual mechanisms of how that would be weighted in quant terms, I'm not there yet. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam, for this typology. I'm sitting here hiding. This typology actually is I think, also applicable for non-popular music to certain extents. I just want to make that point. And having actually worked with a similar typology in the classroom, when analyzing music, I wonder why I'm not seeing on your slide any kind of type that alludes to religious anti-Semitism specifically. Because that is a type of anti-Semitism that really has informed not just popular music, so many types of music for the longest time. I think it's
Sorry, could you just repeat the phrase before the last but one sentence? I just didn't hear it, sorry. Religious anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Religious anti-Semitism, which I think is the mother of them all, or the father, or whatever. And then in the 19th century started to be not just superseded but joined by these other types of anti-Semitism gradually in the course of history.
You are absolutely entirely correct there. I would not excuse the omission. I would aim to partially explain it, that I guess my sort of sample set, thinking through the case study, as I say very early, tended to emerge post-recording, 20th century, by which time much of the overt religious, not all, much of the overt religious anti-Semitism had already been conjoined and incorporated. But you're absolutely right. That would be another, I guess it's already been rolled into those cultural tropes.
Actually, you know, I would see it quite in parallel from what you outlined under racial. So there is definitely intra-musical composition, recording, often ironic and stylized. I've heard that specifically in some metal music that I found, where all of a sudden, you know, some Jewish religious mode is being brought in to kind of evoke something Jewish, and it definitely, I would label this religious anti-Semitism because it's rooted in prayer modes. So in any event, I think it's worth adding specifically, and as the very first column, and to look for examples specifically in the realm of popular music as you develop this. So that's a comment, not a question, not really a question, but I really
useful
think,
one, thank you.
I really think this is an amazing project, and it might be even worth forming a working group around this with people who are not just involved in popular music, but who want to add from other musical genres, and to really kind of flesh this out in a kind of big format in order to give guidance on how can we analyze music, not just as social contexts, but as music, and really be musicologists in order to really make sense of the vast repertoires that we are grappling with.
I'd definitely be open to that. Switching into sort of grant application mode, you're thinking, oh, stream A would be the musicology that looks at the thing, and stream B would be the social media, stream C would be, the other context. Absolutely, thank you.
Is there a specifically musical typology to be invoked here? So some of the talks we heard this morning were about particular kinds of musical tropes around Jewishness. Jewish music is often noisier, following Ruth Cohen. Use of Jewish music is, as represented, I should say, representations of Jews and Jewishness in music, it's often more chromatic, slippery in certain ways, ambiguous in certain ways, not folk-related. Is there any sort of typology of musical representations of Jewishness in popular music?
Not as specifically as that I'm aware of. Not as programmatically as that. It's difficult because at what point, it's hard to say outside of the contextual information to what, sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's less obvious. For instance, is this representing Jewishness, or is it maybe, is it Ashkenazic Jewishness, or is it Eastern European in a sort of general, vague kind of way? And outside of those non or extra musical contexts, it's not always easy to draw a sort of binary yes/no line on that.
Right. So really, what you're developing here is more a typology of lyrics and costumes and things like that. It's not so much a typology of musical gestures or musical tropes.
There's a lot of listings, but I don't know that there's a typology. It's the sort of classificatory work, I think, is what the next step is.
So there's no tendency when it's an overtly anti-Semitic context and someone's criticizing Israel. Is there ever invocation then of musical tropes around Jewish music as they might be thinking?
A lot of the work on that tends to come from histories of Jewish music. So it's not so much, I'm thinking of, I forget the name of his book, John Stratton's book on popular music and, Jewish and British popular music. And there's a lot of stuff around anti-Semitism in there because he's writing about Jewish musicians, but it's sort of threaded through other things rather than classified in its own right, if you see what I mean. And again, sort of work on the US, I think it's Stratton as well, the Beastie Boys, Jews singing in whiteface article in popular music. It's there, but it's not the primary mode of inquiry, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for opening up the conversation. It's something that's very necessary. Building a little bit on what just Fred was saying. So, in my experience, and I have to admit that I mostly know about the case of extreme metal and punk. The musicalization of the Jew often thrives in popular music, very modern popular music, thrives in intellectuality and in taking things out of context. So in that sense, I would invite you to think a little bit beyond authorial intent. I think it would be something closer to what Kathryn was discussing earlier. That is things taken out of context. I imagine like using the theme of the Fiddler on the Roof in a to signify anti-Semitism, and that would also help you think of those cases where ambiguity is purposefully cultivated, and cases where in which the musician, the face of all this, might be actually disavowing anti-Semitism, and yet there is the opening of a space for those behaviors to appear.
Yeah, I would. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm going to need to put in the sonic contagion and all the elements about that. My laptop has got notes. Get this in there. Get this in there. From the last panel, and I think you're right as well. I think that would also be useful for another reason, which I think I've alluded to, but maybe not made as clear as I should have done. And I think it's important that anti-Semitism, like most types, this is one of the problems, most types of negative behavior is not binary. Yeah, people don't, so basically if you're a screwdriver standing there with a swastika on your forehead, then it's obvious. But most anti-Semitism is not obvious, or not that obvious. But there is also, and I agree about authorial intent. Again, that's why it's the Likert scale, I think, would need to, but there's, and I'm trying to think of a way of saying this so that it's not too pejorative. You can be not intending to do something bad, but still culpable for it. Not in some, not necessarily, well, that person's just an anti-Semite and we need to write them off. But nevertheless, like someone that maybe shares an HH meme, oh, HH, oh, that's quite funny. Clear, maybe they're obviously not screwdrivers standing there with a swastika on their forehead, but there's still a level of culpability there. And I think that kind of that needs to be factored into the authorial intent bit. We don't move away from it completely, but we have to admit that it's not 1-0 in terms of, yeah. Yeah.
Playing with Nazi imagery.
Yeah, or 1970s punk in UK, yeah. Susie and the Banshees.
Do we have any more questions?
Since we have so much time, I kind of think that why not hijack it and really kind of flesh this out, and I'm kind of hoping that our colleagues here are chiming in and thinking this wonderful table through. As I'm sitting here and after having taught a class on music, sound, and anti-Semitism, and dealt with typology, I'm kind of thinking, so, how would I kind of edit or expand on this wonderful table? And there are two categories that I'd like to add specifically. One is really music, and one is sound. And when I think of, for example, the teaching that I've done under conspiratorial Zionism, I mean, the distortions of Hatikva that you can find in certain musics, it's kind of a really spot-on example. I've given the other example for religious anti-Semitism and what I found specifically in metal music. For Holocaust denial, when we think of the rubric of sound, we can think of how people bring in specific kind of Nazi slogans. We've actually heard that today in the social media panel, what this is like. And I think that I kind of hope that this conference inspires you in many ways to flesh this out and then to help us all. Because many of us, I think, will develop their work further. And I think this is so helpful. So these were kind of my initial ideas on you know, how to develop this table. And if anybody else has thoughts, I think this is a good collaborative moment to share those thoughts, not just for the sake of Adam, but also for our own sakes, as we really try to do work that is not just qualitative, but also quantitative and systematic. So Amanda is helping out. I'm going to hand down this microphone.
So I'm thinking about Tina and Joseph's comments, you know, drawing on the like, what are the actual music sounds? And I do think art music provides, and this is more just a big question, I think there's some complexities to it, right? Like, first of all, like, the things that work in opera don't necessarily work in, like, symphonic or instrumental music, right? And then, you know, some of the things in opera, I feel like they might fall in, like, one side for one of your things, and then, you know, like it's ambiguous in one area, but it's possibly ironic over here, and, like, so art music, like, I'm trying to map on certain things in my brain, and I don't have an answer here, but I think that art music might destabilize this a bit, which maybe then there can be like a separate version as we're thinking about, you know, from a historical context, and possibly also popular music, right? Like, this is 21st century or late 20th century, but like popular music of the 1910s or 20s might need a different chart. It is so helpful, though. I think it's really exciting, and I really agree with Tina and Joseph that this is something we could map onto to be more like concrete. Yeah. I don't know. Anyone else on art music have thoughts? But
I mean, if I could just respond very quickly to that, I think you definitely hit on something there, which is obviously there's limitations to this, and to, I guess, Tina's point earlier about, you know, why not religious, thinking about the parameters that I set myself at the beginning of this and the limitations. And I wonder, and I'm, again, sort of stumbling around blindly here, I guess. When you talk about art music and opera, I think there's possibly a difference. I'm aware that, and I probably should have thought maybe earlier than that, but that my thinking really started with an era. We're talking basically the post-Adorno, post-mass media era, right? Where compositions were either recordings. I mean, you know, paper notes went nowhere near it. People just got in a studio and did it, or at least written with a view to with the knowledge that this might be recorded. Rather than the composer, that sort of composer-performer distinction. And also, again, thinking that sort of celebrity persona, even if people aren't celebrities, you know, the whole sort of post-Dylan, post-the Beatles, this idea of the performer and the composer in one act, one artistic, which is, I'm not saying that's always the way, but that was a step change from the sort of pre-recorded era. So I think you're probably right, there are different modalities at work there.
Yeah. I think, though, you know, like, we do elevate, you know, if not celebrity, certainly like the hero worship of, you know, the 19th century canonic figures, right? Yeah. And so does that mean that, like, everything that Wagner does is anti-Semitic because it's integrated with his artist celebrity persona? And some people would say yes, right? A lot of people knee-jerked yes for a very long time. And that's what makes all of this so complicated, is because we now today in musicology are also wrapping up the person with the work, right? Since we've made that turn in musicology.
Yeah. I mean, I would say no. You know, and I say this as, well, once and still to a point, a big Pink Floyd fan. You know, Dark Side of the Moon, love it. Animals up to a point. You know, it is what it is. I mean, that's a bit of a get out, but. So I mean, there's that whole, can we separate the art and the artist, is a related but distinct question, and now I forgot where I was going with that. You ask, does it all get rolled into one, the celebrity persona? Answer, no. You can't take all of their work, but it does provide us with sort of interpretative context, particularly when there is ambiguity. So if there's, it is germane to Michael Jackson singing, because Michael Jackson sings Kick Me, Kite Me, Sue Me, Jew Me, and then says, oh, well, oh no, sorry, that was a mistake. It was all, okay, well, we'll let that off. That's a bit, maybe it's not Screwdriver. It's not central to his economic thrust. And then you realize that he's been talking on the phone about his manager. Oh, they're all leeches. Well, that's relevant to the sort of, there's an interpretative question around those lyrics. And that extra musical stuff is relevant data to that kind of interpretation.
So thanks for sharing this, and for Tina for suggesting that we have this conversation amongst ourselves. Yeah. So I'm really just thinking out loud a few things. The idea of perhaps what is anti-Semitism? Is it categorization? I grew up at a time when bar mitzvah, there was some bat mitzvah kids, but bar mitzvah kids often got a book, Jews in Baseball. I understand that. I mentioned Hank Greenberg yesterday. We might think that's okay. Jews in music, Broadway show, maybe. Jews in finance. At some point, we may feel uneasy. And just as in our writing, sometimes, at least I find, that it's the hardest person to edit is myself. So sometimes it's helpful to have someone else look at what I wrote and give me feedback. So who gets to decide? And the authorial intent issue. So this is, you mentioned racism. So let me just mention that there was a time when there were Marx Brothers movie that had blackface in it. Was that considered racist or not? There was a song, Zippity Doodah, written by a Jew that was in a Disney movie, which is the only Disney movie, I think, that you can't get in the United States.
Uncle Remus.
But you could get it based on the stories, yes. Yeah. Song of the South.
Song of the South, sorry, yeah.
But I think you might be able to get it in England. So these are sort of questions that I have as to the intent, the authorial intent. The intent may not be to be anti-Semitic, and yet others might say it is. So pardon me for thinking out loud on these.
Yeah, I mean, at some point we all need to grapple with, contexts change. I mean, there's a reason why Randy Newman doesn't sing Rednecks anymore, and it's not because it's got that line about the smart-ass New York Jew. And he clearly was not advocating, clearly that song is anti-racist in what his mind was anti-racist in 1972 or 3 when he wrote it. Clearly now, him to sing the N-word is a whole different, and so he's like, well, things change. I'm not going to sing that song anymore. And, fair enough. I don't have a definitive answer to this. I know what you mean in terms of authorial intent changes, but I think we can. This is why the scale and that sort of that Likert idea. There's the paper yesterday about the Sephardim in Amsterdam and the Hebraists that were writing about them. They're both anti-Semitic. They're both trading in that, but we can tell the difference between the one writing in 1750, whenever, saying, oh, look at these disgusting Jews, and the other one saying, well, actually, I think all men should be treated equal, but isn't this a bit funny? You know, we can admit that something is anti-Semitic or racist without, a bit like the previous question, without saying, well, that just throws the whole thing, that everything that author or that person has ever done in the bin and casts them into hell. You know, there's the difference between the act. We can't know the inner soul of a person, so let's not try. Let's just judge the act, you know, or the piece of writing. Maybe we're asking too much. Everything has its context, everything all the time, everything louder than everything else. But
maybe just to add like a little bit of a case study to that, when I was talking in my social media thing, when I used the Erica example from Herms Neal, when it really spread like wildfire, so many users would just say, like, chill, it's just a song about a flower, because when you translate it, it's about, you know, this soldier who picks the flower and then brings it to his love in Germany, and so a lot of users just used it like nonchalantly, but at its core, it's still a song that was written specifically for Nazi Germany and writing and marching and to incite that kind of fascism. And also, it does talk about like an Aryan baby and having Aryan kids. And so I think it's still it's intimately linked in that capacity. And so that kind of historical context, even if it's not known, it's still there. And to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, there's all sorts of contexts that we need to, you know, like in terms of intent. First of all, there's things that might not be anti-Semitic in intent, or racist in intent for that matter, but that have anti-Semitic or racist consequences that add to that. There's people that might not even know that, you know, I thought HH meant hello, honey, or something, you know, whatever. And the other I mean, the example I'm thinking of is if, I've seen this sort of go both ways, and actually it's the same thing. If I were to write, again, this has been done, if someone writes, and this is going back a while now, and it was in the, it was in the wake of, there was a murder of a soldier on the streets of the UK. He was violently beheaded. And now someone writes, fuck ISIS, on a bus stop in the wake of that, that's not necessarily Islamophobic. If they write it on a mosque, it is, yeah? Now, if someone, Free Palestine is not anti-Semitic, but when someone writes it on like a bagel shop in Golders Green that's got absolutely nothing to do with Israel, then it is. Yeah, so it's those kinds of contexts that matter in that, you know.
So, well, again, thank you so much for opening the discussion with I think that we're all very excited to engage with this. So what do you think about, first of all, I think you're going to need some kind of tesseract to map this. What do you think about incorporating two more kind of like meta, I don't even know if there would be interaction musical, one being the scene, I think that's how popular music people call it, where you could map social networks, I imagine like, who is this person interacting with? Well, is this metal band, even though they might not be explicitly part of the extreme neo-Nazi metal scene, are they hanging with the neo-Nazis?
Yeah.
So scene, and that a scene can also tell you about audience expectations and how to read things against the grain.
Relationship, actor network.
And number two, which I think is distinct, space, where even though you might not be on the scene itself or also in conjunction, where this is being performed even beyond the recording, I'm thinking in real time, what kind of places these people are performing this that can also help you map how things are interpreted and what, kind of like to go a little bit against the plausible deniability, what you can expect audience understanding.
Maybe just to pause for one moment because you have a logo that is scientist.
Just, I'm going to add very quickly that actually I had historical genre context / scene was something that I had there, and I cut it because I couldn't make the table work. But yeah.
So just, my question wasn't exactly about scene, but that's a better way of framing what my question was about. You know, thinking about like the possibly ironic stylized box, and then the examples that you gave, like 70s punk, right? Like, or Bowie in the fascist outfit, or Joy Division, or, you know, DAF, and like dancing the Mussolini. Like, that feels different, that irony feels different than what we were seeing before on like the social media stuff. So I wonder if you could also like historicize not in like the deep longue durée or like through art music going back to the 19th century, but even just like in the late 20th into the 21st, it feels like, and I don't think it's just technological change that can account for it, but those scenes look like there were scenes that music came out of, and like what's interesting is the way in which like some of the stuff on social media has been extracted from any scenes, and it's just there. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think, I mean, it's interesting, and this is where we get a bit into the, I mean, someone at lunch was saying, you know, do subcultures exist anymore? And it's interesting to an extent how, I think this is where you know, when we're going back, I'm sorry, I'm trying to take notes and do the thing. You know, the margins in the mainstream is still sort of pertinent here. And to an extent, certain things get laundered by success. Bowie's a case in point. And this is where I mean, again, someone at lunch was mentioning Bourdieu and distinction. I can't remember who it was. Bowie, like him or not, is cool, right? Clapton, like him or not, I don't particularly, is not cool, right? Now, Clapton made a bunch of really baldly racist comments. I mean, people may be familiar in the 70s. I mean, he was in the middle of his throes of alcoholism or heroin addiction, I forget which, and came on, I think it was post-heroin, so alcohol. Anyway, off his face, stumbled on stage at the Rainbow Hammersmith, and this is a few years after Enoch Powell's sort of famous, notorious Rivers of Blood speech, and Clapton came and said, Enoch Powell was right. There's, you know, just really bluntly racist, and subsequently has apologized umpteen times for it, but in certain, you know, and is he down forever? I don't want to, I think he's probably a pretty unpleasant person, it seems to me. I don't know, I've never met the man. But, you know, in that broadly progressive milieu, Clapton is toast, yeah? Doesn't matter how many times he apologized for what he said on stage in 1975, 1976, he's toast, yeah? And maybe that's fair enough. Okay, I mean, I'm not a big Clapton fan. I don't carry a torch for him. But that's because Clapton's not cool. Yeah, he did, you know, he's a great guitarist in the 60s, and then he went and did Wonderful Tonight, and then he did this thing, you know. Bowie, on the other hand, is cool. Yeah, we like Bowie. You know, it's a thing to be a Bowie fan, right? Bowie's Me Too record is not fucking great, let's be honest. Do you know what I mean? Bowie slept with 15-year-olds in this, you know, Bowie fascist salute at Victoria Station. I mean, arguably his track record is as bad as Clapton's, yeah, but he's cool. I like Bowie. I don't want my guy to be the thing, so it's, and we are all kind of, and this goes to your previous question about can we separate the art from the artist. There's a certain type of, this is why I think the margins in the mainstream is still important. There's a certain type of cultural capital that still pertains, that kind of launders certain types of behavior, particularly, I guess, with historic behavior. Bowie, the fascist salute at Victoria, and you know, look at all that sort of Nietzschean language on second album, Hunky Dory. Got to make way for the Homo Superior. Come on, you know. But no, he was being ironic. Okay, I mean, I love that song, but you know. So that's a long way round to saying that I agree with you, but we do kind of need a sense of the margins in the mainstream. I think they still exist in that sense.
All right, we have our last question.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to get a chance to say two contradictory things here. Thing one is, I think it's wrong to try and separate the art and the artist in these ways. I think that people's personal commitments, insofar as they can be shown to bleed into their aesthetic commitments and their music, that's exactly what we should be talking about. And for too long, people have tried to erect a barrier between the two. I think that's a mistake. Thing two, which contradicts thing one is I think we need to spend less time trying to psych people out and to figure out their personal motivations and their personal stuff. You can't know what people's psychology is. It's a very murky area. People's intent is very, very hard to scope out. Instead, we should be focused on what cultural work do these works do? What is their effect in the real world? How are they received and understood? What is the context from which they emerge? And not try to psych people out and figure out their intent, because you're never going to know that.
I think of those two contradictory things, I agree with the second one more. By which I mean quite a lot. Yeah, you can't know what's in people's hearts. You know, what did this person say? You know, that's why Michael Jackson's the Jackson formulation is a nonsense. You know, well, it can't be racist because I'm not a racist. Well, that's meaningless. These are the things that you said, and maybe this is the effect that they had.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Adam.
you.